we dive deeper into the heartbreaking saga of Jonathan and Eve. If you thought the first part was intense, hold on to your seats because things are about to get crazier from here. Remember that scary moment when Eve was kidnapped? Well, this is just the beginning. In the next chapter, we will witness Jonathan's transformation from a dedicated doctor to... I won't tell you who to keep the suspense. Prepare for a whirlwind of danger, unexpected twists, and a love story that will test the limits of human endurance. Get ready as we uncover the secrets hidden in the heart of the jungle. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment. Tell me everything. Chapter 2. It was an Army C-37B, which in civilian parlance is called a Gulfstream G550. I thought, only the best for Dr. Mudak. I watched the entire team board. 17 people, support staff, other nurses, Eva, and asshole himself. Eva cast one last anguished look at me as she came aboard. Then they rolled out and disappeared into the gray overcast. I found it hard to look through my tears. In the meantime, I needed to run the clinic and care for patients. Considerations such as duty meant everything to me. In the evening, Eva called. She was in the hostel they had organized, outside Palenque at the Technical University. She said she was living in a dorm room, but the university itself turned out to be a surprisingly nice place, surprisingly modern. We talked for a long time. She was in the mood to remember all the good times. I called her again on Monday night. She said the first day had been spent mostly in meetings. She said she was bored and desperately lonely. I sympathized with her, as that fit my situation in Kansas City just fine. She said that tomorrow the administrative team is going to scout out a couple of sites for the clinic. She said it would be just her, the head nurse, a doctor, a State Department representative, and 3 nurses. They had several places in mind. They were all in desperately poor and overcrowded parts of the city. She said, "Don't worry, I'll never be alone with him." Bless her, she knew exactly what I was thinking. I called her on Tuesday, but there was no answer. I called her cell phone all day. There was still no answer. Tuesday turned into a Wednesday with no sleep. I called probably 1,000,000 times. Her phone seemed to be off. I have no idea how I managed to work that day. But doing useful things can help one get through a lot of anxiety. Nevertheless, the waiting was becoming agonizing. So I decided to go to Rochester. I called the receptionist and asked her to tell tomorrow's patients that I had an unavoidable emergency and to reschedule the appointment. Just as I was gathering my coat, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Doris on the porch. I said, "Doris, it's good to see you, but I have to go." She stiffly ushered me into the house. It was so unexpected that I said with irritation, "I really have to go, Doris." She looked at me grimly and said, "You'll listen to me if you care about your wife and my only child." I felt the walls closing in. I walked over to a chair, sat down to regain my balance, took a deep breath and said, "Tell me everything. Don't hold anything back." Doris is of Viking lineage, and in her gaze toward me, you could see her heritage of blood and mayhem. She said, "You probably guessed that Ava had a problem with Dr. Williams." So it was true. I nodded my head in agreement. He was hitting on her every minute you were gone, too close to her, socializing with her and making intrusive remarks. She tried to avoid him, but he became more and more insolent until he attacked her in one of the examination rooms. I must have looked horrified because Doris added hastily, "She broke free of him and ran to me." I went back to the clinic and cornered the varmint. He was very smug and acted like checking on the nurses was a doctor's right. I told him explicitly what the people of this town would do to him if I said a word about what he had just done to Eva. I thought, that explains Eva's strange behavior. It also explains why she didn't tell me. She knew I would have killed the bastard. Consequences be damned. And then it hit me. It completely confirmed Dr. Dern's sudden interest in helping the people of Mexico. He wanted to get Eve away from her support system. My anxiety level spiked. Doris gave me the basilisk look she uses to freeze unruly customers and said with emphasis, "That's not why I'm here. Eve instructed me to contact her on an emergency basis." I looked stunned. I asked, "Why you and not me?" Doris replied fondly, "She didn't want to add to your worries. She was going away with Dr. Williams. It was bad enough. She didn't want to make it worse by implying that the area was so dangerous that she needed emergency contact. She knew I would tell you if anything happened. Then she added, starting to lose her composure, I just got a call that Eva's car was found abandoned near one of the archaeological dig sites. Her group was working in a bad part of town, and it's assumed they were kidnapped. I knew that kidnapping was not an entirely unheard of activity for some elements down there. Then Doris added grimly, a government spokesman said they are negotiating with the Mexican authorities to get them back safely. I was shocked. My Eva, the love of my life, had been kidnapped by a gang of Mexican thugs, and the people who put her in this situation wanted really bad? Every second my wife was in the clutches of these animals was unnecessary. Some people can go to church and pray, but the Rangers lead the way, so I knew what I had to do, and it never occurred to me to do otherwise. My decision to go out there and handle it myself wasn't as idiotic and self-serving as it might seem. Hostage rescue is my specialty, and this wasn't my first time at the rodeo, or even my fifth. It's just that we've always worked as a team before. This time, all the planning and execution would be on me. I said, don't worry, Doris. I'll get her back. Just tell the patients that the clinic is closed for a while, and I'll take care of the rest. The flight out of O'Hare was at 5:45 in the morning. He was flying to Killeen, Texas. That gave me time to make the necessary calls. You may wonder why I flew to Killeen and not directly to Palenque. Well, it would have taken me almost 20 hours to get to Palenque by air with all the connections and transfers. I didn't have a fancy private jet at my disposal like Dr. Douchebag. At the same time, from Killeen to Palenque, I could get from Killeen to Palenque by car in about 24 hours. Of course, that wasn't the main reason I was driving. First, I needed to stop and pick up a few necessities in Killeen. Fort Hood is home to the 4th Infantry Division, and many of my battle buddies were assigned to that division. So when I left security on a cloudless Texas morning, there were 2 fraternity men waiting for me. They were busy while I was traveling. We shook hands, but we didn't waste any time. They briskly escorted me to a Ford Explorer that was parked on the curb. The driver jumped out of the car, we shook hands too, and I drove down Highway 281, heading for McAllen and the Rio Grande. I arrived at McAllen at 1 p.m. The border search was simple. I didn't look suspicious. I looked military, with obvious high and sturdy weapons. They quickly inspected the car and used the mirrors. Then they let me through. Everything I needed was attached to the frame of the car. It was unrecognizable. I would pack it up when I reached my destination. The rest of the stuff looked like photo equipment for tourists. The journey down the east coast of Mexico was at desperate speeds, so it actually took less than 20 hours. Doris kept me supplied with information all along the way. 2 of those who were with Eva stayed at the kidnapping site to deliver the ransom demand. No one from that part of town had seen anything. That's to be expected. Groups that commit crimes like this can be very close and violent to people who see something. Members of Eva's group said they thought it was a local bandit gang, not a cartel or guerrilla unit, but they had no idea where they were headed. Eva's abandoned car was found at an archaeological dig site, so I decided to start there. I arrived at the parking lot at 4 p.m. on Friday. I walked 300 yards down a long tree-lined trail to the site. The heat was incredible, and the jungle around me was alive with movement and sounds. The noise of monkeys and birds reminded me of something out of a Tarzan movie. The site itself was a classic UNESCO tourist attraction with very well-kept Mayan ruins. It was located at a higher elevation than the surrounding jungle, which was fortunate because to my right, I could see one of the traditional Mayan staircase temples. From its summit, I could see the jungle for miles. I had assumed all along that the kidnappers would go into the jungle from where they had abandoned the car. That's why I took the FLIR T-1020 infrared forward-looking system with me. If there was any heat source in the surrounding jungle, I could see it from the top of the pyramid. I also had a pair of 3rd-generation Armasight N15 military night vision goggles. With them, I could navigate no matter what I saw. With these goggles, I would see high noon, and I thought the analogy was apt. My last specialty gear was a Barrett M107A1 with a Leupold Mark 8 M5B2 tactical scope and suppressor. Only the government has access to that kind of gear. My friends loaned it to me for a while. From a quarter-mile range, I could put 3 661-grain cartridges into the palm of my hand, and our best snipers thought I was a bad shot. They could do the same thing from over a mile away. The decommissioned M107 parts were strapped under the SUV. Otherwise, I was sure I would arouse suspicion if I tried to drive into Mexico with a sniper rifle nearly 5 feet long in the back seat. Of course, I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near an archaeological dig after dark. So I booked a room at Marguerite and Ed's Cabana. I expected to see a third-world establishment with hot pillows. But what I got were quaint little huts tucked among the trees of the rainforest. There were the usual number of small lizards, but no bedbugs, and everything was much nicer and more modern than I expected. Even more important was that I had managed to secure the outermost block behind me, so I wouldn't have to climb out of the bathroom window to sneak into the jungle. Everything must be dark and desolate for me to begin my journey. I had only gotten 4 hours of sleep in the previous 40 hours, and at Rangers you learn to sleep when you get the chance. So I set my alarm for 11:30 and slept another 4. At midnight I was well rested, and with all my gear I was moving southwest through the jungle. I was aiming for the ruins. It was literally like broad daylight if you put your goggles on. So it was relatively easygoing if you set aside all the rainforest crap, including one very large and scary-looking snake. The archaeological site itself had been cleared. Therefore, to remain undetected, I had to go completely around it. As I climbed to the top of the pyramid, there was no hiding place. But once I got up there, I could take cover. I checked the immediate surroundings with the FLIR. Nothing was visible, not even a guard. So I climbed up the narrow steps of the Temple of Inscriptions and found a spot at the top from where I could observe. I expected to have to keep watch all night and probably a few more nights. But as soon as I turned on the FLIR, I saw a large hotspot on a volcanic mountain about 10 miles to the west. It lit up the FLIR as if there was a Cinco de Mayo festival going on there. A small campfire and bodies were generating a lot of heat. So it was clearly a camp, even if it was completely invisible to the naked eye. I thought, really? These guys are clearly not criminal masterminds. Of course, the night was pitch black, and infrared detection might not be something the Cholo knows about. Maybe that was my goal, maybe not. I didn't know at that point. It was 11:30 p.m., with about 7 hours until dawn, and I decided to sneak over to this camp to see what I could see. In the years that I had been out of the Rangers, I had never once lost physical shape, so the 10 miles took me a little over 2.5 hours. I had to move up the slope, but when I got there, I found rocks and ledges above my goal. I poked around until I found the perfect spot for a sniper's nest. The FLIR showed a dozen heat sources. 4 of them were indistinct, in a sort of makeshift tin hut. The other 8 heat sources were spread across a small clearing in front of the hut. Most of them appeared to be asleep. They had a campfire burning, which created a halo that obscured part of the infrared picture. I was still a quarter mile away from them, and even with the superior resolution of my night vision goggles, it was impossible to tell if they were the same guys. It was important to make sure they were the exact freaks holding Eve, because if they were, I was going to make sure they all went to sleep. I left the FLIR and Barrett at the tip of the promontory and made the final quarter-mile trek to my targets. I was wearing a black, tight-fitting, light-absorbing ballistic nylon tactical suit and a balaclava. I was invisible in the dark unless someone was standing next to me. I carried a K-bar and an M9 Beretta. These were my standard Ranger weapons, and I felt comfortable with them. When I reached the camp, I saw several vaqueros awake, acting as guards. They were smoking and talking. As I walked around the clearing, I heard one of them say something to the other. They both laughed loudly. Then the one who had been talking got up and went into the hut. A commotion began. Then there was a shout, a slap, and soon after a loud, the grunt of a woman having something done to her full body. The sound confirmed what I'd assumed. It was the same guys. I just hoped I hadn't heard it was Eve. A couple of the others were awakened by these sounds coming from the cabin. They got up slowly and crept inside to get in line. Meanwhile, I was moving as fast as I could toward my sniper's nest. When I reached it, it took me a second to calm down. The thought of my angel being with some dirty thug made my heart beat more often than it needed to for a shot, even at the relatively easy distance of 400 yards. I took a few cleansing breaths and silently focused the crosshairs of the Barrett Universal Night Sight on the guy sleeping farthest from the fire. A bullet hit from a Barrett isn't that insignificant. So I planned to put the one who was the least conspicuous to sleep and then sneak over to the one who slept closest to the fire. You may ask why I didn't just go in with my gun drawn? The answer is that I am a smart and disciplined ranger. They had AK-47s. So from a tactical standpoint, the odds were on the side of 8 assholes with automatic weapons, not one guy with 15 rounds in his melee pistol. More importantly, I was Eve's last hope. If they put me to sleep, they would bury all of our bodies in a hole in the rainforest, after Eve had survived a few hours of unspeakable horror. I wanted to be buried next to my wife, but not that way, so I had to level the playing field as much as possible, if I was lucky, and if they were stupid enough, I could end the game right here and now. But first, I had to face the devil inside me. I had to convince myself that what I was doing was right. I was a soldier. I've put myself to sleep many times, but it was all in the heat of battle. It's never easy, but it is something that can be done for the right reasons. On the other hand, it takes strong nerves to put a sleeping man to sleep. There is no honor here. There is no courage. It's an execution, plain and simple. I told myself that I was simply removing the barriers between me and my beloved, and had no sympathy for my goals. It was their actions that brought them to the threshold. I was merely an agent to set the inevitable price. But beyond all that, I was especially loath to put these very people to sleep, for I was certain that one of them had already done something to my wife. The suppressor silenced the shot. The only indication that my target had gone to the great fiesta in the sky was the sudden movement he made when the .50 caliber bullet hit. I moved to the next guy who was just starting to recover from the rather loud thump of the impact. It must have sounded like someone dropped a heavy log on the ground next to him. I was aiming for their bodies. Heads are hard to hit, and I didn't need the spray. But more importantly, a .50 caliber bullet can really mess you up. The bullet is 3 times larger than the high-velocity 5.56mm round that the M4 fires, and they have almost the same muzzle velocity. So there was no need to worry about just wounding those bastards. If you hit a man in the chest with a .50 caliber, he'll fall asleep from hydrostatic shock no matter where exactly you hit. Even better if the bullet goes into the ground. That way they would look peaceful, lying in the dark after the impact. I systematically massacred 4 of them that way, silently and without remorse. The guard was next. His disappearance must have alerted the others, because he was standing in front of the door, watching and chuckling. When I put a bullet in him, all hell broke loose. The hit scattered everyone in the hut, which alerted the vaqueros inside to the danger. But it was very dark, and without night vision, everything was completely unclear. The 2 guys watching the show were stupid enough to jump out with automatic rifles at the ready. The genius to my right fell asleep just like his friends. This time, he hit the center. The other one hid behind the wall next to the door. At 400 yards, a high-velocity 50 caliber bullet will go through tin plate as if it wasn't there. It will do the same to wood or plaster. The FLIR showed my target standing with his back to the wall, next to a door peeking out of the opening. I took aim and fired at the wall. The FLIR detected the hit. The last guy grabbed the woman and dragged her out the door. She was screaming and begging. He stood in the open, holding a gun next to her. Seriously, he must have been at the end of the line when the brains were being handed out. 7 of his comrades had just fallen asleep at the hands of an invisible killer, and this idiot was standing in the open, waving his gun around. I did humanity a favor by removing him from the gene pool. Most of his body was covered by a woman who, thank God, was not Eve. I don't like headshots. They have a low hit percentage, even from such a short distance. Worse, I had no idea if there was anything behind his back if I missed. But I had to. So I slowed my breathing and heartbeat, and literally finished what I started. As I approached the hut, screams came from inside. My heart ached at the thought that my precious angel was one of them. I was still in my tight-fitting tactile suit with balaclava and night vision goggles. When I walked through the door, the 4 terrified people must have thought they had been invaded by Martians. Eve was tied to the wall, screaming and crying like everyone else. But she was alive. I could see them all very clearly, while they saw only a ghostly shadow. My first thought was to run up and take Eve in my arms, but I wanted to give her a second to calm down. So I stood next to her and said in the softest, most soothing tone I could muster, "It's okay, baby girl. The bad guys won't bother you anymore." There was a temporary pause, and Eva looked at me with surprise on her face. She said with pathetic hope in her voice, "Jonathan?" I replied, "Yes, my love. I am here to take you home." During my time in the army, I served with a lot of tough guys. But my wife, a Viking shield maiden, proved to me that she was the toughest person I knew. She had been kidnapped and probably subjected to something bad. But that didn't stop her from saying in a surprisingly calm and ironic tone, "What took you so long?" I laughed. It was how we always bantered with each other, and given the situation, it was an incredibly brave and nice gesture. There were 3 women and 1 man. The man was Dr. Idiot. The woman being molested was one of the younger nurses, a pretty babe who had turned into an empty pretender to humanity, lying in front of the cubicle. The other woman was also young and quite beautiful. The 8 Mexican freaks who had left were evidently going to have a party. I regretted their horrible last minute even less. I cut Eva's bonds with the KA bar and whispered, "Let's go outside." I didn't really need to whisper. Because Dr. Douchebag was making an incredible noise, crying, screaming, and begging for mercy. I understood that he feared for his life, but it was especially unmanly to humiliate himself. I almost went up to him to gloat. But I knew I had to disappear without a trace. I helped Eve to her feet. She was in a lot of pain. Part of it was just from being tied up for so long. I didn't want to even think about what the other reason might be. I had to take her out of the hut because she couldn't see anything. An ordinary man might have been frightened if he had been led blindly in pitch darkness. But my wife was as trustingly brave as she was beautiful. As I led her outside, into the firelight, I took off my balaclava and goggles. She threw her arms around my neck, clung to me, and began to wail, "My God, Jonathan, how did you find us? Where are the people who held us?" Her body shook with a fit of shock. I said with a sense of deep satisfaction, "They have been finally removed from the equation. Now I need you to brace yourself some more, or I'm going to be in big trouble." That quickly brought her back to her previous state of mind. She was dirty, her golden hair disheveled, and she was wearing her usual hiking shorts and boots, but her blouse was almost completely ragged. I didn't speculate on the reasons for this, or I would have to do what I truly wanted to do. I said, "I have just put 8 Mexicans to sleep. Of course it was done to save the lives of 4 Americans, but I am a private citizen, and the authorities will consider my actions a lynching. So no one can find out who did it. I'll leave you the knife and my gun." I pulled the safety off the M9 and held it out to her with the butt forward. It had been made anonymous before I picked it up, and Eve is very good with a gun. Then I added, "You'll have to get the other 3 out of here. There's a small farm road about 1.5 miles in that direction." I pointed east. My voice trembled with excitement as I spoke. "I know you can do it, my brave wife." I finished with all the love and anxiety I had felt for the past 72 hours. "I love you, my angel, and the next time I see you, it will be in our happy home. But soon the sun will rise and I have a long walk ahead of me." I pulled her against me and we kissed. We would talk about this at another time and place. I knew this fearless woman would not let us down. When full dawn came, I was still in the rainforest. I had passed the archaeological dig site, but was still about 1/2 mile from the resort. I might arouse suspicion if anyone spotted me strolling around in black tactical gear, with a sniper rifle and a backpack full of 21st century electronics, so I took my time and tried to be inconspicuous. I discreetly slipped into my hut while the residents went to breakfast. 15 minutes later, I came out to join them. I was dressed in plaid shorts, Bermudas, and a garish Aloha shirt with a cheap Panama hat. I wanted to look like the biggest jerk in the entire state of Chiapas. I certainly didn't want anyone to connect me to any night stalkers who might be operating in the neighborhood. After breakfast, I loudly let everyone know I was going. "Look at all that old shit up there on the hill." My goal was to give the impression that I was obnoxiously ignorant. News travels fast in Mexico, almost like small-town Wisconsin. When I arrived at the archaeological site, everyone from old ladies selling souvenirs to tour guides were talking about it. It seems that one farmer was making his way down the road toward El Naranjo when he came across a group of haggard and dirty Americans. They told him a fantastic story about how their captors had been put to sleep by an alien creature with strange, beady eyes. The locals didn't understand how one entity could put 8 tough guys to sleep so easily. So they willingly bought into the rumors of an alien invasion. They said that the leader of the group of captives was a determined American woman armed with a knife and a gun. She said she had taken these weapons from one of their dead captors. I thought, good girl, Eva. The 4 captives were being prepared for transportation to Bethesda, simply out of precaution. The women were all tainted, and the man had broken ribs, a slightly fractured skull, and badly damaged muscles from the beating. The State Department briefed them, but none of them saw anything but the alien. Naturally, this story was immediately dismissed by the authorities, but they had no better explanation anyway. This was sensational news because the captives were all part of a humanitarian medical team. The Mexican government condemned the actions of several rogue citizens. The US government was reviewing its entire policy on humanitarian assistance. In short, it was the usual ass-covering, bureaucratic piling on, signifying nothing. I took a leisurely drive back to Killeen. A few extra things were strapped into my Explorer. I handed my brothers the keys. We shook hands and I boarded the flight to O'Hare. I picked up my car in the parking lot and was back seeing patients at the clinic on Monday morning. It was a short and relaxing 4-day vacation. At least that was my story, and I stuck to it. Meanwhile, Doris was with Eva in Bethesda. I did not visit her while she was there. My excuse was the need to run our clinic. Both women knew the real reason. I couldn't draw attention to myself. If the press ever found out I was an ex-ranger, they might dig a little deeper and find 8 bodies. I couldn't let that happen, of course. The doctors in Bethesda found that Eva was surprisingly healthy, both physically and mentally. This did not surprise me in the least. Eva had always been a very strong woman, capable of making sensible decisions about her life. Shit happens from time to time. The true measure of a person's resilience is what happens after. What they did was an abuse of a woman's soul. So the worst outcome could be the complete destruction of her psyche. I knew my Eve wouldn't let those 8 low-life bastards do that to her. It wasn't that she was in denial. She knew exactly what had been done to her. She just had too much inner strength and spiritual integrity to let that dictate everything that happened next. Instead, she made a conscious decision to move on with unwavering courage. I waited for her in our peaceful home when she returned to Wisconsin. The last time I saw her, she was scared, hungry, and exhausted. This woman in front of me had gone through her own personal death valley and came out the other side, resilient and victorious. I've known guys who've been through something like this, shootings, gunfire, or IEDs, and they've always had that hunted look in their eyes. Eva didn't have that. She'd been through much worse, but she looked calm, peaceful, and dazzlingly beautiful. Her valor was worthy of a medal. She closed the door and leaned her back against it. She looked around, as if enjoying the calm harbor after a big storm. I just stood there while she got her emotions under control. Then she rushed to me, wrapped her arms around me, and hugged me like she would never let me go. I looked at her tear-stained face, and we kissed for the first time since we'd been in the middle of all this bedlam. I said, "Welcome home, my love." She replied, "Oh my God, Jonathan. I never thought I'd see you again." She then pulled me to her and kissed me even longer. I wanted to spend the evening with her so badly that my teeth ached, but I deliberately held back, thinking about what she was going through. Of course, she read my mind. She asked from below, near my chest, "Did the incident with those men change you?" I laughed and replied, "Those weren't men. They were rabid animals. Knowing what they probably did to you, I actually enjoyed every second of it." She said with wisdom in every syllable, "I feel the same way. As far as I'm concerned, our love is still pure and untouched. Whatever they did to me, they did not touch me. I was strengthened within myself by my love for you and our life together. Every second of that disgusting time, I took refuge behind the adamantine walls of that commitment. I will never let those vile things tarnish the soul I gave to you." I looked into her incredible ice-blue eyes. They looked at me with a deep sense of love. I even said out loud, "Are you sure about that?" She replied with loving irony in her voice, "I have never been so sure of anything in my life. I need to burn this experience out of me, and you are the only person who can do that. So let's get to therapy." She wasn't kidding. At 38, she was in the prime of her life. She had always been slim and trim. Her magnificent back was impeccably muscular. She turned to face me and introduced herself, a confident feminine smile on her face. She knew how striking she was. Her figure resembled an anatomical diagram labeled female. I stood in shock, as I always did when I saw her like that. She was too beautiful for a small-town guy like me. But she was mine, and I wasn't about to let her go, because this love would last until the grave. I let out a growl of delight, walked over and enclosed her in a hug, fully clothed. Then she said, "Aren't you forgetting something?" She looked intently at me, standing there in my shirt and khakis. She said with a smirk, "You'd better fix that problem quickly, or I'll start the celebration without you." And to my great regret, I had to cut out this solemn celebration of this wonderful couple. But I remind you, my dear viewer, that all full versions of the stories are on our Patreon, and the link is in the description. Let's continue with this wonderful story. When I regained my sanity to think about her, I found her lying unmoving, breathing quietly. I gazed into that beautiful Swedish face with its exquisite high cheekbones, perfect Scandinavian nose, and incredibly full sculpted lips. It was the most insanely beautiful sight I had ever seen. Then she opened one eye and looked me over. She was like a Karelian lake, dark blue and bottomless. She said with deep feeling, "Thank you, my darling. It is only because of our love that I survived." We were together all weekend. I told Eva that I was ready to talk about anything she wanted to talk about, but she said there was nothing to talk about. In her mind, this whole horror story happened in a universe far, far away. Now she was where she should be, where she had always wanted to be, and that was all she cared about. Doris came over with the usual Sunday feast, and we spent all Sunday wrapped up in a blanket of family coziness. When we went to bed, I said, "Your mom told me about your problems with Williams." She looked at me grimly and replied, "I'm going to take care of it early tomorrow morning. He's never touched me before, but if I get my way, that over-entitled sack of shit will never practice medicine again." I meekly replied, "You should have told me." She looked at me with genuine disbelief and said, "So what? Would you have put him to sleep too? I love you too much to put you behind bars for the rest of your life, and I knew that's exactly what would happen if I told you." She was right. It wouldn't be a pretty sight. Then she grew serious and said, "When he planted this trip on us, I was gathering evidence to back up my harassment complaint. I knew he was just trying to leave me alone to work on me. That smug prick really thinks every woman he meets wants to spend time with him." She laughed mockingly and added, "As if that's what was supposed to happen. He didn't even realize that my phone recorder was on the whole time he was proposing to me." Wow! I would have sent a thank you note to the guys who systematically and brutally beat the bastard. But unfortunately, they were all already in the cauldron. Then she smiled slyly and said, "The fact that I'm in danger because of his machinations is only an eye-opener. I'm not just going to file a complaint. I'm going to sue Mayo for negligence for allowing such a horny dog to boss any woman around. When I'm done, I can guarantee that our life will be what it was before he was in it." I mentally noted that I would never joke with my loving wife. She's a little more ferocious than a mama grizzly, at least when it comes to the ones she loves. In fact, she was a lot like her mother Doris. I turned off the light, and we lay under the blanket. I put my arm around her. She asked sleepily, "Again?" I said, "Again." And we spent another night in our quiet house in a happy little town in Wisconsin. Epilogue. The Mayo Company was so eager to satisfy Eva's complaint that they sent a whole platoon of high-profile suits to negotiate terms. They realized how much they had been set up to be screwed. Apparently, Dr. Dern had experience with similar incidents in Rochester, which is why they sent him to the wilds of Wisconsin. That Eva had recorded evidence of what had been done to her at the clinic was bad, but she also had proof that she had been assaulted and potentially killed as a result of the doctor's scheming. They were desperate to make her forget all of this, so they offered millions. We flatly refused. All we wanted was our simple life back. So we agreed to their ironclad commitment to guarantee our professional independence within the minimum legal requirements. Then we returned to primary care practice. Needless to say, the AMA was not happy with Dr. Idiot. It takes a lot to get a license revoked, but they went as far as they could in the process. They also made it clear that any further lapses would guarantee that he would be practicing medicine in some place like Uruguay, because he would not have a license in the US. They also made sure to publicize their problems with him in the medical community. The last anyone heard was that he was working at a clinic in Nomi, Alaska. There he didn't have to worry about freezing his you-know-what off. The Mexicans took care of that. 7 months have passed. Every day was filled with love and pleasant work. And in January of '39, Eva announced that she was pregnant. She was in such indescribable joy. I reminded her of what the doctors had told us. She said that during her gynecological exams, the doctors at Bethesda had diagnosed a cervical insufficiency and corrected it with microsurgical sutures. Eva told me that their main concern was that the fix would prevent her from getting pregnant. But since she was already pregnant, it was a moot point. We could expect the happy event in 6 months. Eva wanted a baby so badly that she spent the last 2 months in bed. The whole town followed the events of the last few weeks more than the events at Lambeau Field, which should give you an idea of how important the birth was to all those good-hearted people. Doris was omnipresent, feeding, training, and fluffing Eve's pillows. We were close enough to the date of natural labor that the doctors in Madison decided to do an induction. The night before, a parade of cars followed us down US 90 to the University of Wisconsin Hospital. The whole town wanted to be present for this happy event. I was with Eva throughout the birth. She may be 39 years old, but she has the strength and energy of a much younger woman. Little Brooklyn came into the world at 2:19 p.m. on a gorgeous October afternoon. The sun outside was literally flooding the delivery room with golden light. All that seemed to be missing were the heavenly trumpets. Brookie complained loudly about her treatment as she was placed on the table to be cleaned up. I went over to her to talk to her. I said, "I want to introduce myself, my little lump of love. I am your daddy, and your happiness will be my obsession for life." My little angel stopped fussing and focused her bright blue eyes on me. It was an eerily normal look for someone who had only been alive for 5 minutes. Then she reached for the finger I was holding out to her. She took it in her tiny hand, held it up, and looked at me calmly. Perhaps she recognized my voice from all the times I had spoken to her in the womb, or maybe it was just a reflex. Nevertheless, this simple act cemented a bond between me, my wife, and my child that only a husband and father can understand. It was then that I realized it was all worth it. So, our fairy tale has reached its climax. Jonathan and Eve, 2 ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. Their love story is a testament to human resilience and the enduring strength of the human spirit. From a quiet life in Kansas City to a harrowing ordeal in the Mexican jungle, their journey has been a roller coaster of emotions. Jonathan, a man of duty and compassion, became a fearless warrior when faced with the unthinkable. His actions were driven by a primal instinct to protect the woman he loved. But let's not forget that this was a man struggling with his own demons. Taking another human life, even in the name of justice, is a heavy burden. His actions stood in stark contrast to his peaceful profession, revealing a complex and multifaceted character. Eve demonstrated an inner strength that few people possess. Her ordeal was a crucible that transformed her into an even more formidable woman. Her ability to find solace and resilience in the face of such horror is a testament to the human capacity to endure. Her love for Jonathan became her anchor during her darkest times. This story is a stark reminder that even in the most ordinary of lives, extraordinary problems can arise. This is a story of love, loss, and redemption, a story that resonates with the complexities of the human experience. While we've covered the major plot points, there's still a lot to unpack. To delve deeper into the characters' psyches, understand the full impact of their experiences, and witness the complexities of their relationships unfold, I invite you to explore the full story on our Patreon. There, you'll discover the hidden depths of their emotions, the challenges they face in rebuilding their lives, and the enduring love that binds them together. This is a story that will stay with you long after the last page. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. And remember, the adventure doesn't end there. The full story is available on our Patreon. Link in description.